All right, diving in today, folks, to a period that, well, it really set the stage for so much of how we think, even now. The 18th century Enlightenment, you often hear it called the century of philosophy. And, for anyone like you really wanting to grasp those core foundations of like intellectual thought, we're going to unpack those big ideas, but without drowning in every little detail, I promise.
Yeah, I think that's key, right? We're aiming to distill the most vital insights from this really transformative era. We'll zero in on that remarkable intellectual and scientific progress, and what's really driving it all, this ambition to make human life better, to actually improve things. And they saw philosophy, and I mean that in the broadest sense, encompassing science, politics, everything, as the way to do it.
Exactly, yeah, using knowledge to improve the world. And our main roadmap for this deep dive is that entry on the Enlightenment from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Think of it as like a concentrated dose of the essentials, We'll hit those key arguments, connect them all up, and make it crystal clear why this period is still so relevant today, especially if you're into, well, the history of ideas. So first things first, what actually makes the Enlightenment, well, the Enlightenment? What defines it?
That's the thing. You can't really pin it down as like a rigid, unified doctrine. It's more like this loosely connected surge of intellectual energy. And one of the focal points, for sure, is this network of French thinkers. Mid-1700s, we call them the philosophes, guys like Voltaire, D'Alembert, Diderot, Montesquieu. They were like an informal society of men of letters. And that collaborative spirit, most famously seen in their monumental encyclopedia, it really captures the essence of how they approached things.
Yeah. Right. The encyclopedia, this almost crazy effort to like gather up all of human knowledge in one place. But it wasn't just a French thing, right? There were other hubs, other centers of Enlightenment thought popping up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the French philosophers were crucial, no doubt, but the Enlightenment had these vibrant hubs all over Europe and even in America. Think about the Scottish Enlightenment. You've got figures like Hutcheson, Adam Smith, Hume, Reid, or the German Aufklärung guys like Wolff, Mendelssohn, Lessing, and of course you can't forget Kant. And beyond those major centers, you had all these individual thinkers, each contributing to this broader movement, this intellectual sea change.
So with all these different people, all these different places, what was the common thread? What held it all together?
I think the key to understanding what makes the Enlightenment coherent, despite all its diversity, lies in its core aspirations. D'Alembert himself, right, he called the 18th century the century of philosophy par excellence. And he pointed to two main reasons. One, the significant intellectual and scientific advancements. And two, this deep-seated belief, this conviction that philosophy, again, broadly conceived, had the power, had the potential to fundamentally improve human existence. And that drive, right, to use reason, to use knowledge, to make life tangibly better, that's the central current, the heartbeat of the Enlightenment, I'd say.
It really does sound like this major turning point, this shift in how people thought about the world and their place in it. Where did this confidence, this ambition, where did it come from?
It was fundamentally rooted in the scientific revolution, that period in the 16th and 17th centuries. Those landmark discoveries, things like shifting to a heliocentric view of the solar system, they didn't just overturn centuries of accepted wisdom. They also demonstrated the sheer power of human reason, of empirical observation. And this success was incredibly empowering for philosophy. It allowed philosophy to move beyond being just a handmaiden to theology. It established itself as an independent force. Philosophy now had this authority to question those long-held ideas and to build new understandings, both in theory and in practice, based on its own methods, its own ways of knowing.
So the scientific revolution, it really provided the initial push and the momentum, and the Enlightenment thinkers, they grabbed onto that and just took off running. They were all about intellectual progress as the path to a better society, better individual lives.
Exactly. And it's absolutely crucial to acknowledge those earlier thinkers, the ones who laid the essential groundwork, the foundation for this 18th century flourishing. You got figures like Hobbes, Locke, Descartes, Bayle, Leibniz, Spinoza. Their ideas, their challenges to the traditional ways of thinking, they were absolutely vital in shaping the intellectual landscape that the Enlightenment inherited.
And the impact of the Enlightenment, it wasn't just limited to these abstract ideas, right? It's famously linked to some really significant political transformation, revolutions even.
Oh, absolutely. The intellectual energy, that ferment of the Enlightenment, it directly fueled the growing social and political discontent, especially in France. And this all culminated in the French Revolution, 1789. this dramatic upheaval aimed at dismantling that old hierarchical order, the monarchy, the privileges of the aristocracy, the church's dominance. And the revolutionaries, they were very explicit. They wanted to establish a new order based on reason. They were trying to put into practice those Enlightenment ideals, liberty, equality, those core concepts.
It is just remarkable how these philosophical ideas they actually translated into real world change, real world revolutions. But the Enlightenment as a specific historical period, it didn't go on forever, did it?
No, it didn't. It's hard to pinpoint an exact end date, but the French Revolution's descent into the Reign of Terror, that period of intense violence and instability in the 1790s, that's often seen as a turning point. It seemed to contradict that Enlightenment optimism, that faith in the power of reason, and coupled with the rise of movements like Romanticism. Romanticism really emphasized emotion, intuition over that pure rationalism. So the Enlightenment as a distinct historical period, it started to fade around the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century.
But it wasn't just a time frame, a chapter in a history book, right? I mean, Kant, he offered this different perspective on what Enlightenment actually means.
That's right. For thinkers like Kant, the Enlightenment was more than just a moment in time. He famously defined it as, I think I get this right, humankind's emergence from its self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's own understanding without guidance from another. And this definition, it really highlights that core Enlightenment principle, the importance of thinking for yourself, of relying on your own intellectual capacities to decide what you believe, how you act.
So it's about intellectual autonomy, right? Having the courage to think for yourself, as Kant put it. And this naturally led to a certain, critical stance towards those existing authorities, the powers that be.
Exactly. Well, Enlightenment thinkers, they held a range of views on specific issues. They generally shared this strong confidence in the human mind, in our intellectual abilities. And with that came a skepticism towards other forms of authority. Tradition, superstition, prejudice, myths, even miracles. Especially when these authorities seem to clash with reason, with empirical evidence, what we can observe and test. And this often created tension with established religion, because independent thought, it frequently involved questioning religious doctrines, the church's authority in matters of belief and how we should live.
So the underlying faith of the Enlightenment, it wasn't in a divine being, a God. It was in the very process of enlightenment itself, right? This idea that by becoming more intellectually autonomous, we'd create a better world, better lives.
Precisely. This belief in progress through reason, through individual autonomy, that was the engine, the driving force. And to really grasp how this played out, we can look at the Enlightenment through these three main areas. Mm-hmm. Their perspectives on the true, and that includes science, epistemology, metaphysics, the good, which is about their ideas on political theory, ethics, religion, and finally the beautiful, their views on aesthetics. So shall we start with the true?
Absolutely. Let's dig into how they approach science, the nature of knowledge, those fundamental questions about reality itself.
Well, in an era so dedicated to progress, advancement in the natural sciences, that was seen as the clearest evidence of progress, but also a major driver of it. Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687. That's a landmark, a monumental achievement. His success explaining such a wide range of physical phenomena, from how planets move to how objects behave here on Earth, and he does it using a few elegant, universally applicable mathematical laws. It was profoundly inspiring.
That must have been a truly revolutionary moment.
Oh, absolutely. It really was. And Newton's work, it powerfully reinforced this Enlightenment view of nature as an ordered system. There are laws, mathematical laws, governing it all. And it bolstered this belief that humans were capable of understanding these laws. We can grasp them using our own intellect. Yeah. And this really shifted the focus towards understanding the natural world and the very process of how we come to know it, which becomes a central concern for Enlightenment philosophy.
And within this pursuit of the true, different schools of thought start taking shape, right? Like rationalism and empiricism. Let's start with rationalism. What role did it play in the Enlightenment?
Well, the rationalist system developed by René Descartes, that's undoubtedly one of the foundational pillars. He really wanted to establish the sciences on this firm, unshakable metaphysical basis. And his famous method of doubt, right? He systematically questions everything that can be doubted. And that perfectly embodies this core Enlightenment attitude, this commitment to rigorous inquiry, this skepticism towards any unexamined assumptions, anything we just take for granted. Descartes doubted the reliability of our senses. He argued that those fundamental truths about God, about the soul, they're best accessed through innate ideas. Those ideas we're born with, not through sensory experience. And his mind-body dualism, that also framed the material world as something external to our consciousness. And this leads to this enduring philosophical problem, this problem of objectivity in our empirical knowledge. How can we be sure that what's in our minds, our mental representations, accurately reflect the reality that's outside of us? Descartes' own solution, of course, it relied on the certainty that he found in our knowledge of God.
So even though Descartes ultimately he grounds knowledge in a divine being, that emphasis on the power of individual reason, on rigorous questioning, that's very much in line with the overall spirit of the Enlightenment, right? And he made some pretty significant practical contributions to science too, didn't he?
Absolutely. Even though he had this metaphysical framework, Descartes did advance natural science in important ways. He challenged those prevailing scholastic assumptions. He developed a mechanistic view of matter, of the physical world, and he provided some essential mathematical tools, for example, applying algebraic equations to geometry. And that was crucial for expressing physical laws in a mathematical language. Even Voltaire, who was a huge admirer of Newton, he readily acknowledged Newton's intellectual debt to Descartes.
It's so fascinating to see how these thinkers, they built upon each other's ideas, but also reacted against them, pushed back, And Cartesian philosophy, it also sparked a lot of debate, and that really fueled the intellectual engine of the Enlightenment, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That relationship between mind and body, the origin of motion, the nature of causality, and then those fundamental epistemological questions, about objectivity, the role of God in knowledge, the existence of innate ideas. These are all fiercely debated topics that stems from Descartes' work. And they provided this fertile ground for other Enlightenment thinkers to develop their own perspectives, their own answers.
And then you have Spinoza, another major rationalist figure, but he takes philosophical ideas in a pretty different direction.
Yeah, Spinoza's rationalist metaphysics, he lays it out most clearly in his book, Ethics. And it had this profound impact. In contrast to Descartes' dualism, Spinoza proposed what we call ontological monism. It's this idea that there's only one fundamental substance. He called it God or nature. And that the mind and body, they're just different attributes of this single substance. So his denial of a transcendent personal God and this identification of God with the totality of nature, that became a major catalyst for atheistic and naturalistic viewpoints within the Enlightenment. And his rationalist principles also led him to this very strict determinism and a rejection of teleological explanations, the idea that things in the world have inherent purposes.
That's a pretty radical departure from traditional religious doctrines, for sure. And Leibniz, another giant of rationalist thought, he also played a significant role, especially in shaping the German Enlightenment.
Oh, absolutely. Leibniz, with his principle of sufficient reason, this idea that everything must have a reason for its existence, that perfectly captures that underlying Enlightenment belief in the rational intelligibility of the universe. His ideas, they were often spread through the work of his follower, Christian Wolff, who tried to create this comprehensive rationalist system of knowledge derived from a priori principles. And these were hugely influential in the German Aufklärung.
But even with these grand, these all-encompassing rational systems, they ran into limitations, there were criticisms, right?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, the rationalists, they offer this really compelling vision of a complete science derived from first principles, but they ultimately couldn't fully realize it. As Kant would later point out, their efforts often ended up, as he put it, a battlefield of endless controversies. Questions arose about how purely logical principles could actually give us substantive knowledge about the world as it is. And there were criticisms against attempts like Wolff's to derive that principle of sufficient reason from the principle of non-contradiction. So while rationalism, it set these incredibly ambitious goals for human reason, its limitations and the debates it generated, they also helped clear the way for other philosophical approaches during the Enlightenment.
Which brings us to empiricism, this idea that our knowledge, it comes primarily from sensory experience, from what we observe. How did this contrasting school of thought, how did it shape the Enlightenment?
It's interesting. Despite the Enlightenment sometimes being called the Age of Reason, the rise of empiricism, both in scientific practice and how we think about knowledge itself, epistemology, that was just as characteristic of the period.
Yeah.
The enthusiasm for reason, it wasn't primarily about reason as this independent source of knowledge. It was about the power of human cognitive faculties in general, especially when you contrast it with that earlier era dominated by religious faith. Mm-hmm. And while those major rational systems, they held immense sway, the fact that Diderot and D'Alembert, they dedicated their groundbreaking encyclopedia to three key empiricist figures, Bacon, Locke, and Newton, that really shows the growing influence of empiricism.
And Francis Bacon, he's often seen as a foundational figure for empiricism, even though his most important work, it actually comes before the 18th century.
That's right. Bacon, he's a Renaissance figure, but he's widely considered the father of experimental philosophy. His revolution in scientific thinking, it emphasized the crucial role of empirical observation, of doing systematic experiments, the inductive method, moving from specific observations to more general principles, and also the practical application of knowledge, using it to benefit humanity. His famous saying, "Knowledge is power," that really sums up this focus on tangible outcomes making a difference in the world.
And in Newton's own scientific method, it was very much in line with this Baconian emphasis on observation and induction, right?
Exactly. Unlike the rationalists who often thought of scientific knowledge as this deductive system, derived from a priori first principles, mm-hmm. Newton's approach, it started with careful observation of natural phenomena, what's actually happening out there. And then he used induction to come up with those mathematical laws that could explain those observations. The undeniable success of Newton's what you might call bottom-up methodology, it contrasted with those seemingly endless disagreements among rationalists about those fundamental principles. So naturally, it contributed to more and more people adopting empirical methods throughout the 18th century.
And this shift, it also led to a growing independence of natural science from metaphysics, didn't it?
Yeah, for sure. The 18th century, you see natural science increasingly separating itself not only from theology, as it had started to do in earlier centuries, but also from the realm of metaphysics. Newton's work, it demonstrated that science could make real progress, significant progress, without having to rely on those a priori, self-evident first principles. And this fit very well with the Enlightenment's general suspicion of any kind of obscure or unsubstantiated authority claims, which initially they targeted those religious dogmas, but gradually it extended to the claims of traditional metaphysics as well. Mm-hmm. While there were still some Enlightenment thinkers engaged in metaphysical speculation, the overall intellectual trend was becoming more and more anti-metaphysical.
And John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, that was another incredibly influential text, one that really pushed forward this empiricist turn.
Oh, that's absolutely foundational. Locke's work was hugely admired for its epistemological rigor, its carefulness. He set out to examine the limits of human knowledge by investigating the workings of the human mind itself. And he famously argued against the existence of innate ideas, those inborn ideas. He asserted instead that all of our ideas, they come from sensory experience. That's where they originate. His theory of sensationalism, it had a profound impact, especially in the French Enlightenment, where thinkers like Condillac, they took his ideas and radicalized them, arguing that all human knowledge, it can ultimately be traced back to basic sense experiences. And that really contributed to the development of psychology as a field of study.
But this way of ideas, this idea of examining knowledge through the lens of our conscious experience, it also led to this persistent problem of how we can be sure that our perceptions, that they actually match the external world, right?
It did. If our knowledge of the world outside of us is always mediated through those internal ideas, those representations in our minds, how can we ever be certain that they accurately correspond to the objects that they're supposed to represent?
Yeah.
How do we know that the reality out there isn't fundamentally different from how we perceive it? Berkeley's idealism, which proposed that material objects are just collections of ideas in the mind, that was one attempt to solve this problem. But it didn't gain as much traction in the broader Enlightenment as materialism or Cartesian dualism did.
And then you have Thomas Reid and the Scottish Enlightenment. They offer a critique of this way of ideas, this focus on ideas.
Exactly. Reid, he challenged this notion that what we immediately perceive are our ideas within our own minds. Instead, he advocated for what he called naive realism, this idea that we directly perceive common material objects, those things in our environment. He presented this as a defense of common sense against what he considered the overly abstract and kind of counterintuitive doctrines of some philosophers. And this emphasis on common sense and the practical relevance of philosophy, that was a defining characteristic of the Enlightenment, especially in Scotland.
It's fascinating to see these different philosophical schools. They're all grappling with these very foundations of human knowledge. And alongside the strong confidence in reason, in empirical observation, there was also this significant current of skepticism in the Enlightenment, wasn't there?
Yeah, and that might surprise some people. Skepticism played a really prominent role, even amidst all that optimism about human intellectual abilities. It's important to note, though, that a lot of this skepticism, it was methodological. It was used as a tool to actually advance knowledge, not as an end in itself. Descartes' use of radical doubt in his meditations, that's a great example. He used this systematic doubt to clear away those preconceived notions, those biases, and to search for those absolutely certain, those indubitable foundations for knowledge. Given the Enlightenment's critical stance towards those traditional doctrines, it makes sense that thinkers also use skeptical arguments against dogma in science, metaphysics, and religion.
But it wasn't just a methodological tool, a means to an end, right? Skepticism, it seems like it was a genuine and influential part of the Enlightenment spirit itself.
It absolutely was. And the influence of Pierre Bayle is a great illustration of this. His massive historical and critical dictionary with its extensive and often subversive footnotes, it was incredibly influential. It perfectly embodied this spirit of fearless questioning, challenging religious, metaphysical, even scientific dogmas across the board. Bayle's work, it really promoted the value of independent inquiry, of daring to know, which, as we talked about earlier with Kant, is really a central theme in the Enlightenment.
And this pervasive critical attitude, it ultimately led to what you might call a crisis of authority, right? This crisis in what we can believe, what we can trust, even the authority of reason itself came under scrutiny.
Exactly. And this intellectual crisis, it's perhaps most powerfully illustrated in the work of David Hume. Now, some people might see Hume as being kind of on the outside of the mainstream of Enlightenment thought. But his skepticism, it can really be seen as a natural outcome of this internal questioning, this questioning of authority within the Enlightenment itself. He famously questioned the reliability of our senses based on that very way of ideas we were talking about earlier. He also argued that even demonstrative reasoning, which relies on those seemingly certain rules, it ultimately becomes probabilistic. It becomes about probabilities, not certainties, because we're fallible. We make mistakes in how we apply those rules. And this led to his rather unsettling conclusion that in a sense, all knowledge degenerates into probability.
And his skepticism about inductive reasoning and about how we understand causality, that really shook things up. It challenged those very foundations of Enlightenment thought. It even seemed to cast doubt on the validity of Newtonian science itself, the very science that had inspired so much of the Enlightenment.
It did. Hume argued that our reliance on cause and effect, it's actually based on this unprovable assumption, this assumption that the future is going to resemble the past. And this challenged the rational basis for making those causal judgments, those judgments about cause and effect. And it seemed to undermine the very empirical approach that the Enlightenment valued so highly. Hume's profound skepticism, it raised this fundamental question of whether any epistemological authority, any source of knowledge, could really withstand rigorous critical scrutiny. And it highlighted this potential for intellectual despair, even within the seemingly self-assured Enlightenment.
It's a fascinating but also kind of unsettling tension, right? This incredible drive for knowledge, for progress. But at the same time, this deep and probing questioning of the very foundations on which that knowledge is supposed to be built. And this also led to a new and intense focus on humanity itself, what they called the science of man.
Yeah, even as Hume was grappling with the implications of his skepticism, his larger intellectual project, the project he set out in the Treatise of Human Nature was to establish a comprehensive science of man. This ambition to understand human nature through scientific principles, that was widespread in the Enlightenment. Alexander Pope's famous line, "Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man." That perfectly captures this significant shift, this shift in focus from the divine to the human. Just as Copernicus shifted the center of the cosmos, the Enlightenment, it placed humanity at the center of its own intellectual inquiry. And this led to the rise of scientific investigations into human nature.
But this scientific view of humanity, it also created this tension, didn't it? This kind of inherent paradox.
Absolutely. On the one hand, those remarkable achievements of science, they were a source of immense pride. They showed the impressive power of the human mind. But on the other hand, the scientific study of humanity itself, it often presented this rather unflattering picture, this view of ourselves as purely natural creatures governed by deterministic laws, by cause and effect, lacking genuine free will or this special immaterial soul. La Mettrie's Man and Machine, that's a really stark example of this tendency to reduce or deflate humanity's traditional self-image. So you had this simultaneous celebration of human reason, and then this scientific perspective that seemed to undermine the very basis of that celebration.
And the methodology of epistemology itself, it reflected this tension. With Descartes' cogito, right? His I think, therefore I am, that marked a turn towards self-knowledge, although it was still grounded in reliance on God. And then Hume, he more explicitly positioned this science of man as the foundational discipline for all the other sciences. But he also presented this rather diminished view of human reason and what it can do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Hume's Science of Man, while central to his whole project, it significantly marginalized the role of reason. It even attributed forms of reasoning to animals. He grounded our fundamental beliefs in custom and habit, not in rational insight.
Right.
And he famously denied the existence of free will, which directly challenged that traditional view of humans as rational and autonomous agents, those who can make their own choices. And this is where Immanuel Kant comes in, where his philosophical work becomes so important. It's this Copernican revolution in epistemology, as it's often called.
Kant's attempt to resolve this apparent conflict, right, between our scientific understanding of the world as this deterministic place governed by laws and our deeply held sense of ourselves as free agents, as rational beings capable of making moral choices.
Exactly. Kant, he wanted to figure out what the limits of human knowledge were, but at the same time provide this firm foundation for scientific understanding. He famously argued that objects, they conform to our ways of knowing them. It's not that our minds passively conform to objects as they are in themselves. He proposed that our minds, they have these fundamental cognitive forms or categories, things like substance, causality, space, time, and they structure and shape our sensory experiences, making both coherent experience and scientific knowledge possible a priori. That is, prior to and independent of any specific sensory experiences. He intentionally limited the scope of purely rational knowledge to the realm of possible sensory experience. So that excludes those metaphysical concepts like God and the soul from the domain of demonstrable knowledge, things we can prove. He also introduced this form of transcendental idealism, suggesting that we only ever know objects as they appear to us as phenomena, not as they are in themselves as noumena. And this anthropocentric shift, it placed the structure of human understanding right at the very center of epistemology.
And through this complex philosophical framework, Kant, he aimed to make room for both those deterministic explanations the science offers and the possibility of human freedom and even religious faith through his concept of those unknowable noumena, those things in themselves, as he called them.
Yeah, it was a truly radical and hugely influential solution, although it's also one that's been debated and interpreted ever since. But it clearly highlights that central tension that the Enlightenment was wrestling with, how to reconcile this emerging scientific understanding of the world as deterministic with our deep-seated beliefs about human freedom, about moral responsibility, and our place in the larger scheme of things.
And finally, within this broad category of the true, we see the rise of new scientific disciplines and that monumental collaborative project of the encyclopedia.
Absolutely. The Enlightenment, its commitment to empirical observation and to inductive reasoning that naturally led to the development of new fields of systematic inquiry. Things like history, anthropology, aesthetics, psychology, economics, even sociology as we know it today. Mm-hmm. And the encyclopedia, spearheaded by Diderot and D'Alembert, that stands as this powerful and enduring symbol of the Enlightenment's ambition and its core intellectual tendencies. It was subtitled Systematic Dictionary of the Sciences, Arts, and Crafts. And it was this massive collaborative undertaking to compile, to organize all of human knowledge, driven by these overarching goals of promoting progress, spreading knowledge widely, and ultimately fostering societal transformation, making society better.
It was a decidedly secular and implicitly anti-authoritarian project, which of course led to some pretty serious censorship efforts from the powers that be from the ancient regime.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But the collaborative nature of its creation, this strong sense of shared purpose among those French Enlightenment intellectuals, and its self-conscious aim to educate, to improve society, to make it better, that makes it a quintessential example of the Enlightenment spirit. And the fact that it tried to encompass the entire spectrum of human knowledge, from the most abstract theoretical concepts to the most practical and technical skills, that reflects that Baconian ideal, that ideal of knowledge as something useful, something applied for the betterment of human life.
So the true in the Enlightenment was this really dynamic interplay of rationalism, empiricism, and skepticism. And alongside that, you have this new focus on understanding human nature through scientific methods, and this powerful drive to systematically organize and share knowledge widely. Now let's shift our focus to the good. How did Enlightenment thinkers approach those interconnected realms of political theory, ethics, and religion?
The Enlightenment is probably most immediately and popularly associated with its profound impact on political thought and the development of modern democratic ideals. This was a period that saw three really pivotal revolutions. You've got the English Revolution of 1688, the American Revolution of 1775-83, and the French Revolution of 1789-99. And all of these, they laid those crucial foundations for the democratic systems that we have today. The remarkable successes in the natural sciences, those provided a powerful impetus for this ambitious project of reimagining and remaking the social and political world based on principles of reason. And this led to a really critical reevaluation of those existing institutions, which were often seen as being based on outdated religious myths or obscure traditions.
And this critical scrutiny, it was accompanied by a more positive and constructive project, this project of actually designing what they consider to be more ideal forms of social and political organization. Things like government based on the consent of the governed, articulating those ideals of freedom and equality, recognizing those inherent individual human rights, advocating for religious toleration, and emphasizing the importance of checks and balances within government.
Exactly. We owe a lot of the fundamental principles, the structures of Western democracies to the intellectual work done during this period. However, as we touched on earlier with the French Revolution,